So, is CB Cebulski the hero we need or not? So, over the weekend, I went back to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, and I ended up being surprisingly busy, which is why I didn't end up uploading anything. And one thing that it gave me the chance to do was it gave me the chance to dig out some of my older comics to sort of compare them to modern day comics. Comics from only 10 years ago, just to see how much the medium has changed. So, Avengers Fairy Tales was a series that they did back in late 2007, early 2008. Um, it was an attempt to sort of branch out and to sort of do a different kind of thing. Fairy tale type stories were very popular then. They're still kind of popular, but I feel like they're not as popular. Um, this one is Peter Pan, which is interesting because I thought that Peter Pan actually was not public domain. I remember Bill Willingham talking about how in Fables originally Peter Pan was going to be the bad guy, and they started setting up for it, and then they realized they couldn't actually use him. And I think this was before Marvel got bought out by Disney, so I'm not 100% sure how they even managed to use Peter Pan. But whatever. By the way, tell me if my voice sounds weird because I'm trying to learn how to project more and how to sort of speak using the my full like range of vocal cords and whatnot. So I'm gonna try to be yeah sounding not quite so lispy and so soft. Anyway, so this was, you can see right here, this was written by CB Cebulski. And at the time, because when Marvel announced that CB Cebulski is going to be the new editor-in-chief, this is what I immediately went to, was Avengers Fairy Tales. And I actually thought I had more of these, and I guess this was the only one I bought, which is fine. You can see it's a limited series, one of four. So we know for a fact that Marvel has been trying to in very halting and half-measured steps, they've been trying to branch out and to gain a wider audience, and they haven't really been successful at that by any stretch of the imagination. They may have gotten a few more far left fans that care about census level, skin level diversity, but they've pushed away a lot of people that traditionally have read their comics, and frankly, they have just, for the most part, failed to tap the market that stuff like this is going for. So I remember this being well received at the time, but they never really followed up on it. There was no Avengers Fairy Tale ongoing. They really didn't do very much with this. It's also interesting because we know that they're trying to go for the anime crowd, they're trying to go for the Doctor Who crowd, but they're kind of doing things completely wrong. I mean, in order to try to go for this sort of anime manga crowd, they've stripped out, they've made depictions of women not nearly as sexualized, which anime has lots of sex. It has very heavy heterosexual relationships. It has very heavy relationship drama. Women are usually portrayed as being very capable, but they're also portrayed often wearing very revealing outfits, whereas in modern day Marvel, they've completely gutted both of those. They've toned down the violence, but they haven't really, which is interesting because in anime and manga, violence is very prevalent. It's very graphic and violent. Yes, there are other things about manga that American comics have never tried, like the whole yaoi thing and whatever the whatever the lesbian equivalent of yaoi is. I don't remember what that's called, but they've tried to go for sort of a different audience, and they've just completely failed at doing that. But it's interesting because, like I said, they never really followed up on this, and I don't know why. Because I would have thought that in order to get a younger or more female heavy audience, this would be the kind of thing that you would go for. It's much more kid friendly. It's much more safer. There's not really the sort of um, testosterone-driven violence and crazy plot points that was prevalent in, say, the early 90s. Um, so I would have thought that this would be the kind of thing that they would go for, and maybe CB Cebulski um, will change that. Uh, like, if all comics were like this, if all American comics, I would stop reading it. Because this is not in the tone of that at all, of what I, as a reader who's been reading comics for at least 10 years now, 10, 11, 12 years, have come to expect. But if this was a side thing that they were doing, kind of like DC Superhero Girls, that would be fine. And DC Superhero Girls has done tremendously well. What was it? It sold like 1 million units or something this past year. It was an incredibly high number. But they did that, and they didn't sacrifice the core superhero story that's remained true since the early the early 40s. Likewise, this one it retells the story of Peter Pan pretty straightforward. We have, instead of Wendy and her brothers, we have Wanda and Pietro. And they are brought to Neverland by this Peter Pan figure who's just simply called the Captain. And he's accompanied by his fairy, who's the Wasp. And they get to Neverland, and they find out that you have the Lost Boys here, who you see this Iron Man character, the Black Panther character, this Hawkman character, this Thor character, and they are being menaced by this character, Claw, who Captain America cut his hand off during a battle however long ago. So using Claw, so these are pretty clever. Using Claw as Hook, yeah, that's pretty smart. And you also, the way that this is set up, with the Lost Boys being the classic Avengers, although I don't think Black Panther was an Avenger at this time during the mid 60s, which is when I think Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver became Avengers. But other than that, there's a lot of callbacks to classic Avengers history. So, as a single story for like a kid, it works. As a story for like a parent to read to their kid, it works. But also, if you're a longtime fan of the superheroes, it works too, because there's a lot of references here. Obviously, Captain America, in the mid 60s, I don't know exactly when it happened, but most of the Avengers, except for Captain America, quit. And for various reasons. And they were replaced by Quicksilver, Hawkeye, and Scarlet Witch. And they were Cap's kooky quartet for a while, until later on Wasp and Ant-Man came back, Vision debuted, some other characters came in, I don't remember all the details. But so this takes place sort of in this this is a reference to that sort of transitional time in Avengers history. And we see Captain America. Captain America is the boy who never grew up, or another way to put it, the boy who's out of time. Whereas these Lost Boys come from the main world, so they at least know. They've been in Neverland so long that they've forgotten what the passage of time is like, but at one point they did know it. Whereas there's almost no indication that the Captain does. And it's kind of interesting, because I've heard Captain America more than once referred to as the most DC character that Marvel has. He's a character that's sort of iconic, that's sort of almost mythic, but as a consequence of that, he has a very simple character, and he doesn't really change much, whereas all these other characters have gone through significant changes in a fairly short time frame. Just in the short time frame from the mid-60s to the early 70s, a lot of these characters underwent pretty dramatic transformations. By the way, this is one of my All-time favorite series of anything ever. J. Michael Straczynski and Olivia Coipel on Thor, yes. Some of these ads really take you back. This is one of the great things about reading older comics. So yeah, then we get this really great shot here of the Avengers finally assembling. You see that Captain America is using his shadow as a shield. And the shield, or the shadow, rather, has a life of its own, so it's sort of iconic in its own right. And then finally, they sort of realize that they have to go back to the real world to grow up. And then it turns out that the whole thing was Scarlet Witch telling these kids a story. So yeah, this is very much a sort of all ages type of thing. Kids can enjoy this. Adults, like I said, can read it to their kids. Girls would not find this threatening in any way. So this is the kind of stuff that Marvel really ought to be doing. And like I said, this didn't really have a lot of long-term success, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't serve as some kind of blueprint, right? You take this, you figure out why this really didn't catch on, and then you change it. And now that they're owned by Disney, you'd figure they would be great at this stuff, because Disney, for all its myriad faults, is really good at appealing to kids. And it's just kind of amazing that Marvel has been so terrible at it, especially now that they have this huge sandbox to draw from. Why don't you have the Mickey Mouse characters crossing over with Marvel characters? Why don't you have them crossing over with, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver? Why don't you have them crossing over with Phineas and Ferb? I mean, I don't really particularly care for those shows. I mean, I'm 27, so I shouldn't. But beyond that, I'm not sure I really see the appeal. But, I mean, they're popular. They've made an impact, and yet they're sort of stuck on their own. I know that it is sort of frustrating to see your... Well, like I said, if the whole Marvel line was like this, if it was just this sort of Disney XD tween dumb, well, this isn't dumb, but the sort of kid-friendly sort of harmless aesthetic, I would never read a Marvel comic again. But if they had a whole line that was dedicated to this kind of thing, you'd figure they'd be doing a lot better, and they're just not. They're going about trying to appeal to a more diverse audience by going hard left, by going, full identity politics, SJW, and that's not the kind of thing that appeals to the sort of diverse audience that they actually want to go for. Because it turns out that the diverse audience, which is diverse in skin color, it's diverse in gender, it's diverse in sexual proclivities, it's also diverse in their interests. So. Ms. Marvel, even Ms. Marvel, which is supposed to be a success, it's only a middling success. It's really the only one they can point to, and all their other attempts at appealing to that kind of audience have failed too. But this sort of thing, I could see this having a much wider appeal, and I don't know, Cebulski, when he becomes editor-in-chief, is going to be pushing for stuff like this, but hopefully it will be. So, tell me what you thought. Tell me if you read this. Tell me if you read the other issues in this series when it first came out. In any case, this is Unranked Chevron signing off.